I was standing at the end of the table when my sister said it. Not angry, almost calm. Family doesn't owe you anything. The lawyer didn't look up. The clock on the wall kept ticking, too loud for the size of the room. I remember noticing a crack in the paint near the window and thinking how long it had been there. How many times our mother must have looked at it without fixing it. My sister folded her arms like the matter was settled, like I had already lost. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sit down either. My hands were shaking, but I kept them behind my back. I said, "Then go ahead." The lawyer finally looked at me. "Read the will." And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, I knew whatever came next would finish something between us that had been breaking for years. I grew up believing my sister was the strong one, and I was the reliable one. That was the arrangement no one ever said out loud. She spoke first, decided quickly, moved through rooms like she belonged there. I stayed. I fixed things. I remembered dates. I showed up early and left last. Our parents never compared us directly, but comparison has a way of happening anyway. When our father died, she handled the phone calls. I handled the boxes. When our mother's health began to slip years later, my sister managed the paperwork from a distance, and I managed the days, the appointments, the grocery lists, the small humiliations she never talked about, like needing help with buttons or forgetting words she had known her whole life. I moved back into the house after my divorce. It was supposed to be temporary. A few months, we said. I took the smaller bedroom, the one with the radiator that knocked all night. I paid what I could. I cooked. I cleaned. I learned the sound of my mother's breathing when she slept, so I'd know when it changed. My sister visited on holidays and emergencies. She brought gifts reminding us who she had become. Better clothes, better stories. She always hugged our mother carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile and already lost. There were moments, quiet ones, when my mother would take my hand and squeeze it twice. That was our signal. Thank you. Or stay. Or don't leave yet. She never said what she was afraid of, but fear lived in the house with us, settled into the furniture. Money was never discussed directly. It floated around conversations like dust in sunlight. My sister would mention costs, care, burdens. I would nod and keep washing dishes. I didn't think of inheritance as something real. I thought of survival, of getting through the next week without a fall, without a mistake that couldn't be undone. When my mother died, the house went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a held breath that never released. My sister arrived the next day, efficient, controlled. She cried once, briefly, then wiped her face and asked where the documents were. That's when I realized we had been living in the same story, but telling it to ourselves very differently. The will was something my mother had mentioned only once. It was late, after midnight, when the house sounds were reduced to pipes and distant traffic. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. "I took care of it," she said, staring at the wall instead of me. I didn't ask what it was. With her, questions sometimes closed doors instead of opening them. Weeks later, after the funeral, my sister asked me where the will was kept. Not if there was one. Where? I told her the truth. I didn't know. My mother had kept things close. Drawers I never opened. Envelopes I never touched. Living with someone teaches you where not to look. We found it together 3 days later, inside a book neither of us remembered her reading. Pressed flat, edges worn soft from being opened and closed more than once. My sister's mouth tightened when she saw the date. Recent. too recent to feel comfortable. She insisted on a lawyer, said it was better that way. Cleaner. I didn't argue. I was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. The central mistake, the one we couldn't undo, happened before the meeting. The night before, actually. We were standing in the hallway, the house empty of everything that mattered. My sister looked around and said, almost casually, "You know, staying here doesn't mean you earned anything." It landed wrong, heavy, like a door slamming in another room. I said nothing. Silence had always been my role. But something in me shifted then. Not anger. Alignment. Things snapped into place the way bones do when set properly. At the lawyer's office, when my sister said, "Family doesn't owe you anything," it wasn't about money. It was about narrative, about who had carried what, and who got to define its value. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. My mother had been precise, painfully so. The house, not sold, not divided, left to me. Full ownership. My sister was left savings. Fair on paper. Unequal in meaning. There was a clause about care, about presence, about time, written in my mother's hand and incorporated into the document. Not emotional, factual. My sister interrupted, said it wasn't fair, said I had lived there, said that was already a benefit. The lawyer stopped reading. That pause, that exact moment, was the point of no return. Because I understood then that whatever I said next would decide not just the outcome, but the shape of the memory we'd carry of each other. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list what I'd done. I just said quietly, "Finish reading." And as the words continued, I watched my sister realize something she had never considered. That love, measured in years and small actions, had left a paper trail. After that day, nothing settled. It just rearranged itself into sharper edges. My sister didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, she went quiet, in a way that felt strategic. She stopped calling me by my name and started using my full name in messages, like we were already strangers handling a transaction. She asked for copies of everything. The will, the house records, old receipts, as if they might prove something intangible had been stolen. I stayed in the house, alone. The first night felt temporary, like someone would come back and tell me it had all been a misunderstanding. I slept on top of the covers, fully dressed. In the morning, the silence was heavier than grief. It wasn't absence anymore. It was judgment. Neighbors started asking questions, not directly, just comments. "Your sister's been by? So what happens now?" I answered carefully, like every word could be forwarded without my knowledge. My sister had always been better at explaining things to people. I could already imagine the version of events forming somewhere else, without me. She sent me a message that week. Long, measured. She wrote about fairness, about how families shouldn't keep score, about how our mother wouldn't have wanted division. That line stayed with me. Wouldn't have wanted, as if wanting had been her strongest trait at the end. I didn't reply. The mistake I made, the one that escalated everything, was agreeing to meet her again. I told myself it was necessary, practical, but part of me still wanted repair, some proof that we could talk without keeping count. We met at the house. "Neutral ground," she said. She walked through the rooms like a guest with a claim, pointed out repairs, market value, what could be done if we sold. Every sentence started with "if," as if the decision hadn't already been made without her. She said I had benefited enough, that living there all those years had its own value, that care was a choice, not a currency. I felt something rise then. Not rage, but a strange clarity. I realized she wasn't arguing for the house. She was arguing against the idea that what I gave mattered more than what she preserved from a distance. I told her I wasn't selling. The words surprised both of us. She laughed, short and sharp, said I couldn't afford to keep it. Taxes, maintenance, time. She said time again, like it was something she still owned. That night, I found the envelope my mother had hidden behind the pantry shelf. Not legal, personal. A list in her handwriting. Medications, appointments, names of neighbors who had keys. And at the bottom, one line. Please, let this stand. I understood then that the conflict wasn't finished at the lawyer's office. It was just relocated. Now it lived between my sister and me, fed by old resentments and new fear. She threatened mediation, then court. Each message was polite, each one heavier than the last. I started to feel watched in my own life, like every decision needed justification. The pressure wasn't loud, it was constant, and I began to understand that avoiding a final confrontation was its own kind of decision, one that would eventually be made for me. Something had to give. The final decision didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, in the kitchen, with the window open just enough to let in the sound of someone else's life passing by. My sister stood across from me with a folder in her hands, thicker this time. She had come prepared to end things properly. Her voice was calm, almost kind, the way people sound when they believe they're being reasonable. She said she was giving me one last chance. Sell the house. Split the proceeds differently. We can still do this like family, she said, as if the word were a bargaining chip. I listened. I really did. I noticed the way she avoided looking at the corner near the stove, where our mother used to lean when she was tired. I noticed she never sat down. When she finished, she slid the folder toward me. Mediation papers, draft agreements, a future already written. I didn't touch them. Instead, I reached into the drawer beside me and took out the will. Not the copy, the original, the one with the worn edges, the handwriting in the margins. I placed it between us. She sighed, impatient now. We've been through this. I opened it anyway and turned to the clause she hated, the one she never let the lawyer finish reading without interruption. I read it out loud, slowly, every word. When I finished, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just closed the document and slid it back to my side of the table. Then I said, I'm not changing anything, and I'm not discussing it again. The sentence felt solid when it left my mouth, heavy, final. She stared at me like I had just chosen something unforgivable, like I had crossed from sibling into something else entirely. She gathered her papers without another word. At the door, she stopped, hand on the frame, and said, Don't expect me to understand this. I nodded, not in agreement, in acceptance. When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt decided. The months after were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just stripped down. My sister didn't call. Not on my birthday. Not on the holidays we used to coordinate out of habit more than warmth. At first, I kept my phone close, the way you do when you know something is over, but your body hasn't caught up yet. Eventually, I stopped checking. I learned the real cost of the house slowly. Not just money, memory. Every room asked something of me. The hallway where she had said those words. The kitchen where my mother used to sit and wait for the kettle to finish boiling, even when she forgot why she'd put it on. Some days I stayed busy just to avoid standing still long enough for those moments to rise. I sold a few things, Not valuables, just weight. Boxes that had been sealed for years, clothes that no longer fit the life I was living. I kept the list my mother had written. I folded it carefully and put it back behind the pantry shelf, exactly where she had hidden it. Not as proof, as placement. Things belong where they were meant to rest. People still ask about my sister. They always do. I say she's fine. I say we don't talk much. I don't explain. Explanation turns it into a story with sides. And I'm tired of choosing one. Sometimes I imagine her version of events continuing without me. Clean, logical, justified. I imagine mine doing the same. Two parallel truths that no longer need to meet. I've realized something since then. Something small but immovable. Inheritance isn't what you receive. It's what you're left holding when everyone else decides they're done. Responsibility doesn't announce itself. It stays behind. On certain evenings, when the light hits the walls the way it used to, I sit at the kitchen table and do nothing. No phone, no radio, just the sound of the house settling into itself. I think about how close I came to giving it all up, just to be understood. I don't regret not doing that. I don't know if my sister ever read the will again, alone, without interruption. I don't know if she ever noticed the handwriting in the margins, or the care taken with words that were meant to stand when voices could no longer argue for them. What I do know is this: when people say family doesn't owe you anything, they're right in one narrow way. No one owes you love, or fairness, or understanding. But some things are still left to you, and once they are, refusing to carry them doesn't make you free. It just means someone else has to.